Test, test. Test one, two.
I love that you found
Let me
like the
turn that
matching
up.
outfits. That's so cute. That's so cool. I'm glad. I think Troy mentioned that to me on Monday.
Troy's
Yeah. Oh, he's fantastic. Yeah, yeah. I'm like, he's okay. Yeah.
Test one, two. There we go. Okay. Think we're ready to get started? Okay. Great. Make sure that's on. Great. Oh, hi everybody. Thank you so much for coming. This is a great turnout, and hopefully more people will come too. But I'm already very pleased to see folks here. And if we have this many people at a Jewish event only 5 minutes after it's supposed to start, we're going to get more than that, I think. So, as I'm sure most of you know, this is Pride Month, celebrating individuals in the LGBTQ plus community and affirming that they should be proud to be who they are. And what we're going to be talking about tonight has been a very important conversation in recent years, and something that we are developing more and more understanding on, and also it's become increasingly controversial, which is a topic called pride and pronouns. Even just today, when we're in anticipation of this event, I was talking with somebody who said, "Oh, how do you know what pronouns to use for someone?" And I said, "Well, I just asked them, what are your preferred pronouns?" And as I was saying this, somebody else walking by was snickering at the thought, or I hear people being like, "My pronouns are patriot and badass." I'm like, it should be, dumbass, because that's not a pronoun. But anyways, just saying, like, that's a noun, not a pronoun. Anyways, for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Sam. I'm the very professional rabbi here. And really excited because this is an important conversation we're going to be having. We have a wonderful panel, and I'll be introducing each of these wonderful, amazing people, and also, I should say, in introducing myself too, given the topic of the evening, that I use he, him, his pronouns as well. And so before we begin hearing from our panelists, people were asking, well, what does Judaism teach about transgender issues? And as we know, there's not really a Jewish position on much of anything. There are Jewish positions. But I thought that I would share some things that are interesting, because my general understanding of Christianity is that Christianity is fairly binary in terms of gender. And I'm making a sweeping generalization, but in Christian theology. But Jewish practice and Jewish teachings have actually been a lot more ambiguous and seem to understand that gender is a bit more fluid. And so I'm going to give some examples. That the Talmud contains hundreds of references to categories other than just male and female. These include, for example, the category of androgynous, which is somebody who has both male and female organs. The tumtum, which is somebody with hidden or underdeveloped genitalia. The elonit, which is a term that is used to describe a more masculine woman. And the saris, which is a Talmudic term to describe a more effeminate man. And it's clear from even this short list that the Talmud recognizes that sex organs don't necessarily make people purely male or purely female. The Talmud also recognizes that an individual's gender orientation doesn't necessarily match his or her sex organs. And this, by the way, some of this I got from Rabbi David Teutsch, who has some communities to this connections to this community, who's written on this. And also the Mishnah says that androgynous is like a man in some ways and like a woman in some ways, like both a man and a woman in some ways, and like neither a man nor a woman in some ways. And while the Talmudic rabbis did not know about chromosomes or hormones, they certainly understood that sex and gender are independent variables, and they made it licit for people to be true to themselves in regard to gender expression. And so a story, by the way, in the Talmud is that I mentioned at Pride Shabbat was that of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. In case you don't know Rabbi Yochanan, he is the haughty rabbi. He was supposed to be the most good-looking rabbi in the whole Talmud, and would sit and bathe outside of the mikveh when women would go in to purify themselves, so they would see Rabbi Yochanan and be like, "Oh my goodness, that man is gorgeous," and then they would go and to the mikveh, and then they would go home and be very excited to see their husbands, and then as a result, they would have beautiful children, thanks to Rabbi Yochanan. Well, there's another story involving Rabbi Yochanan, and it is involving another rabbi whose name is Reish Lakish. And Reish Lakish was the muscular, strong, kind of ripped rabbi. There's not many of those around these days. But, and one day, Rabbi Yochanan was bathing naked in a pond. And Reish Lakish walks by and sees Rabbi Yochanan bathing and says, "That is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." And he jumps in to the pond, and they have a sexual encounter, and then they start complimenting each other's bodies. And one of the things that Reish Lakish tells Rabbi Yochanan is, "You are so beautiful, I thought you were a woman." And so we have from this story in the Talmud, a 2,000-year-old story almost, this fairly homoerotic story that also touches on the fact that this very respected rabbi in our tradition was a bit more of what we would maybe today refer to as more effeminate, or I think in the queer community might be termed a femme. Is that correct terminology? I don't know. I'm bad at terminology. You can correct me if I say anything inaccurate.
It's hard to apply.
Please.
It's sometimes hard to apply contemporary sort of queer
Sure.
terminology through the past, not just because like we don't know, but
Yeah.
also because in some ways those definitions, the way we sort of find ourselves, are ultimately in some sense socially conditional.
Sure.
So, to say, oh, like this person was, transbian would be not an
Right.
accurate description, even if that's might have been how they identified today, because some of those sort of identification markings are so contingent on the sort of the air we breathe and the water we swim in.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that, Lila. And so there's that story. Now, one commandment that we see, you know what? Actually, let me just grab so I don't misquote. We have a handy-dandy Torah right here. Good book, bestseller for the last 3,000 years. And in it, let me turn to Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 5, which is right here. Right here. Here we go. A woman must not put on a man's apparel, nor shall a man wear woman's clothing, for whoever does these things is abhorrent to the Lord your God. Now, that would seem to be fairly polemic against cross-dressing, as we might call it, and a lot of people have interpreted that, too, as being polemical against transgender individuals. But Jewish commentary dives in a little deeper, and the Talmud says that this is only meant if you are dressing, if you're a man dressing as a woman, or vice versa, for the purposes of spying on an individual. Like if I wanted to go into, if I'm identifying as a man and I want to go into a women's locker room for the purposes of spying on people, and that's why I'm going in there, and so I dress up as a woman, that would be prohibited according to the Talmud.
May I add?
Sure.
So Jackie Ashro offers yet another interpretation of
Please.
that. And Jackie has suggested that what that means is it applies to a person whose self-identity
Here.
is as a man,
Can you
or
pass
a
that down?
person whose self-identity is as a woman. And therefore, if an individual self-identifies as a woman, then it's completely appropriate for that person to dress as a woman, irrespective of the person's genitals. And I thought that interpretation, which comes from a rabbi friend of Jackie's in New York, of course, leaves completely unanswered individuals who identify as non-binary. But nonetheless, it offers, I think, a fairly compelling approach to what it makes you dig deeper and ask, what do we mean by a man? What do we mean by a woman?
Yes.
And I think that was a very useful suggestion.
Terry, thank you for that addition. And great point, as always, by Jackie Ashro. Rashi says about it that this is referring to that it's prohibited to dress otherwise for purposes of committing adultery, but we see in the Shulchan Aruch, the code on Jewish law, that it's totally permissible to dress, if you are a man, dress as a woman, vice versa, for Purim, because this is a time for joy, and that can make people feel joyful. The final thing I'll say, and then I'm going to start turning it over to our panelists here, is that in terms of looking at Judaism and issues of gender identity, is I hearken back to the very first person created. It says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and God said, let us make a human in our image after, because by the way, the Hebrew says, Vayomer Elohim say Adam, not Ish, not like man, Adam, which means like a human. So I have an Israeli in the back of the room nodding her head, so I confirm that. So let us make a human in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all creeping things that creep on the earth. And God created a human in God's image. In the image of God, God created him. Male and female, God created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all living things that creep on the earth. And so what we see here is that it's very clearly in the Hebrew saying God is creating a singular human being, but then saying God created male and female, God created them, and then refers to this person as them. And God speaking about God's self in first person plural might be an interpretation. And so if I kind of, for my personal interpretation, and others might disagree with me, interpret the first human being created as being non-binary, and actually the Torah addressing that person with they, them pronouns, and saying this person was made in the image of God, which is a plural name in that first chapter, Elohim. And so perhaps we shouldn't be looking at God in binary forms, but as a non-binary being that, and we see in Judaism, we have dozens and dozens of names of God, some of which are masculine, and others like Shekhinah, which means the divine presence, are feminine names. And so perhaps our God is non-binary as well, especially since the first person seems to be and was made in God's image. So that's my little teaching on my interpretations of transgender issues in the Torah and Judaism. But we have here a panel of people who, in case you couldn't tell already, are far more experts than I am, as they were jumping in and adding to that. And so I'm saying, oh, good point. I'm really thrilled and excited about this panel we have here. I'll introduce each one of them, but very quickly what they'll be speaking on is Olivia is going to talk to us about transgender etiquette and pronoun etiquette and use of pronouns. Lila will be talking to us about her transition ceremony that she created in Judaism. And Terry is going to is a law professor at the university, and he's going to be talking to us. Terry will be talking to us about some of the recent laws passed here in Utah and maybe elsewhere, as this has been a very hot-button issue that have and how that is affecting transgender youth and people in the transgender community. By the way, I should have asked as well, since this is the topic of the evening, would you each share your preferred pronouns with me so I can address you properly? Olivia?
Hi, my name is Olivia, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lila. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Terry, and my pronouns are he, him, his.
Thank you. And so Olivia Jaramillo is a strategic leadership consultant and a diversity and equity Pardon? Oh. Can you hear me though? Yeah. So we'll get this up here. Thank you. If you need me to repeat anything, thank you, Galit. Appreciate the waters. So let me start that again. So Olivia Jaramillo is a strategic leadership consultant and the diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist at Equality Utah. She is currently the director for public outreach at Equality Utah, and she was born and raised in Mexico. She's a retired United States Air Force veteran where she served on tours of Iraq, Europe, and humanitarian missions into Africa. In 2016, she was one of the first individuals nationwide to legally change her name and gender marker while serving on active duty. She has worked in furthering DEI efforts for several companies and organizations, including Vivint, Qualtrics, Dominion Energy, Zions Bank, and Adobe. She is a commissioner on the Salt Lake City Human Rights Commission, a member of the YWCA's Public Policy Committee, and was a political candidate in 2020. She currently lives in Salt Lake City with her son Oliver. And Olivia, I hope you don't mind that I added to your bio something that I saw last week, which is that Olivia was just named to Utah's Women Over 40 lists, 40 over 40 list, celebrating 40 women over the age of 40 in Utah who are making an impact here on Utah, which was a big honor. I was a little shocked to see you on that list because I didn't think you were over 40, I'll tell you that. But congratulations on that very well-deserved honor. And I'll just say I was so excited when I saw you were on our panel because, Olivia, you're a big deal. I see you everywhere. I was at the airport the other day and saw you or something on a TV screen talking, and just Olivia, you seem to be everywhere and making such a difference in our state. So we're thrilled and honored to have you here. We have about 20 minutes to hear from you specifically about, don't worry, I can jump in because we have questions and stuff, but I think that a lot of folks do have questions about use of pronouns, or we might see people who have ze-zer pronouns and not understand that, or a lot of folks have told me that they don't really understand how a person can have they, them pronouns, or maybe somebody uses they, she pronouns, or they, he pronouns, which might be a little confusing for some folks. And so if you could educate us, the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to you, this is my rabbinic decree right here. I think under Jewish law, you should be required to to call people by their proper pronouns. In Hebrew, when we ask somebody their name, we ask "Ech korim lecha" or "Ech korim lach." How do I call you? Or same in Spanish, "Como te llamas?" How are you called? It's, I think, a more respectful thing than what is your name. But what's the most important Jewish commandment? What? That's a good answer. Love your neighbor as yourself. But what do the rabbis say that overrides all other commandments? Almost all of the commandments. All right, come sign up for our religious school. So, saving a human life. Thank you. Pikuach nefesh. Like, if somebody has a heart attack and it's Shabbat, I'm required to pick up my phone and call 911 to save their life. Well, I don't know if you know this, but calling somebody by their preferred pronouns, who is genderqueer, that actually, they are half as likely, I believe is the statistic, you can correct me if I'm wrong, half as likely to make a suicide attempt. And so by calling somebody by their preferred pronouns, you're actually saving a life. And so I think that it should be a Jewish must that you call people by their preferred pronouns. So, Olivia, I'm going to turn the time over to you. Can you please educate us?
In 20 minutes, I'm going to educate y'all, okay? So, no, and I'm really happy to be here with everybody. Thank you, and I'm honored to be here with the panelists, with you, Rabbi. Thank you so much for hosting us. Why am I so close to this? So, yeah, my name is Olivia, and I'm going to give you a quick background on who I am, what I do, and then I'm going to get into the gender etiquette, because we do hear a lot about that nowadays, right? We hear a lot about pronouns and why do I have to use my pronouns and share them with everybody? So I was born and raised in central Mexico. I don't know if anybody's ever been there. I was born, you have? No.
Where in central Mexico are you from?
Zacatecas. Have you been there? Where have you been, if you don't mind me asking? Oh, nice. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's a beautiful place. I grew up in a very conservative Catholic family, so this is actually my first time in a Jewish space, in a synagogue, and thank you so much. It's a huge honor for me to be here, actually, so thank you so much. I think I even asked you, which way can I go up there, because Catholics are really particular about certain things, and so I had to ask. And but all in all, I had a very happy family. You know, we were very church-going and all that, but I had a very happy upbringing, and ever since I was about 5 years old, I could tell there was a little bit of a difference there. And I know you're going to get into your story. I'm just going to give you a quick story, and then we're going to jump into that. But ever since I was little, I could tell that the pronouns being used on me, I mean, I could see outside. You know, I could look in a mirror and be like, yeah, okay, yeah, I see the boy. I see it. But why don't I feel it? And I think that is where those differences are, because we hear sometimes the way we understand life is boy, girl, man, woman. And if that is how we grew up our lives and that is what we heard, that's okay. That is our life, and those have been our experiences. And all of the people in my family, those were their experiences too. When I actually did confide in my grandma that, hey, I kind of want to grow up and be a girl, it really feels good to think about that. And she shut me down. She told me never to share that because my dad would not love me anymore. So it's at that point, being 6, 7 years old, I forget how old I was, you don't want to lose your parents' love. And I was like, you know what? I think yeah, okay, if everybody says this is bad, then this must be a bad thing that everybody deals with. You know, everybody wants to be a girl, right? That's what I thought. And I kept growing up, and I immigrated to the United States. That is something that persisted my entire life. And as I grew up, and I was born in the early 80s. I'm not going to tell you what year, because, I mean, I was already outed by an award. Utah's 40 over 40, so. But I wanted to just kind of come and really feel like, yeah, I want to feel like I am who I am. But I don't know exactly what that means. As I aged, I started learning what the word transgender was. And it started to click, oh yeah, that is what I am. And I started to understand, even before I started really doing a lot of advocacy work, and a lot of understanding beyond that, just my own gender identity. And I started to understand that everybody has a gender identity, right? It's just that the majority of people don't ever really have to think about that gender identity. Whatever you were assigned at birth is what you identify as. You say, yeah, I'm a boy and I feel like a boy and that's what I am, or you're a girl and I am a girl and that's what I feel. And we never think about that. But that is where that difference comes in with transgender people, with non-binary people, genderqueer people. That when we get ready in the morning to go to work and whatever we do to beautify ourselves, right? Whether we're doing our makeup or you're trimming your beard, that is where that difference comes in for trans people. That whatever is looking back at us in the mirror may not necessarily be what we truly feel we are. And I say this because a lot of people, when you hear, oh, did you hear Bob is a woman now? We think, well, that's impossible. Bob can't be a woman. And what we are thinking is, biologically, everything that we know, that is what we are assuming, that, yeah, that's impossible to be that change. But I always invite people to understand a little bit about that concept, that psychological concept of gender identity, that is everybody's personal conception of their own gender. Whether you've never thought about it or not, you have one. And that's where pronouns come in, because we have assigned what we call as pronouns to male, to female. And like I said, the majority of people never really have to think about that. So it feels very natural to say he, her, he, him, her, she. It's very natural to do that. But that is when you start getting into the weeds of what a trans person is. And that is where we probably have that misconception that it's difficult to marry that concept of gender identity. Like, well, no, it's impossible. Olivia can't be she, her. And it's really more about understanding what the concept of gender identity is, which is literally everybody has a gender identity. And if you ever encounter somebody in your life that, let's say, if you know somebody from your past, let's call this person Jim. And Jim now is Janice. I don't know why they would choose that name, but okay. And they go by she, her pronouns now. You've been calling Jim he, him for 40 years. And now suddenly there is a change, and it's difficult for you to understand. You know what the best approach is? Whenever it comes to etiquette, you know this person, don't you? You have a connection with them. Beyond that change that they perhaps have made, you know this person and you connect with them. You know that they're a good person. You know the things that they've done in life. And that is where you can find that point, that common ground with them to say, you know what, Janice, I would love to learn a little bit more about what your experience has been like. That is the point where I always invite people to start your allyship journey towards a trans person. That is a perfect way to start that allyship journey, by engaging in a conversation where we're open to learning something about someone. Most of the time when we're listening listening to respond, right? Like, hey, how was your weekend, Shelley? Oh, it was good. Okay, good. Well, let me tell you about my weekend because it was terrible. We're ready to respond. If we actually engage to understand and really understand what is being told to us, that is a different form of understanding. And it's also important to understand that when we do that, there is a huge difference between listening to understand and listening to agree. It doesn't mean that initial encounter with Janice, you're going to completely agree with this person. But if you open yourself to first understanding Janice, that will pave the way towards a better connection with her and towards better understanding of what a trans person is, even if they are non-binary, even if their pronouns may be they, them. For some people, that may seem very outside of what we know, very much with what I've kind of said already with, if somebody is already stepping outside of what we know as gender, now somebody goes a little bit beyond that, right? And that seems like it's completely outside of our scope, outside of our lens in life. I always invite people to look beyond your lens. We all have a lens in life. That lens includes your religious faith, the people that you've grown up with, your family, whatever sports you like, whatever school you attended, what social circles you have now, what political beliefs you have. That is your lens. And sometimes anything that falls outside of that, it can be a little difficult to understand that. I always invite for people to broaden that lens. Imagine looking at the world through literally a telescope, and you couldn't see the wonder around you. Even here with the mountains that we have in Utah, imagine you just have a telescope and all you see is, well, I just see a patch of dirt. That's all I see. And once you broaden that scope, once you broaden that lens, you see the beautiful Wasatch Range, and you see the wonder that has been created. That is something very similar that we do when we expand outside of what we know. When you learn, for example, about somebody like me, and you hear those experiences that we've gone through, that is how we can come to really understand why somebody embraces she, her pronouns, he, him pronouns, they, them pronouns. You really learn what makes Jim, Janice. And you start to realize, I have known Janice all along. I just didn't know it. It really goes beyond just saying, you know what, this is just very difficult to understand. This is just weird. When we really say, okay, you know what, I firmly know what I am, and I know this person. I want to understand. That is always the first step towards truly understanding somebody's pronouns, somebody's identity, and really embracing that connection that you may hold with a friend, with a coworker, somebody that you celebrate a religious faith with. That is a huge way to move forward in that way.
So, Olivia, can I ask you then, because like you so beautifully and eloquently shared all of that, and you accurately stated, I think that many of us do grow up in a world where at our earliest stages are exposed to there's boy, there's girl, and there's man, there's woman, and everything is binary like that for us. Why? And I think for some people it might even be easier to understand that somebody, when we live in such understanding the world through such a binary lens, oh, Jim identifies as Janice and it uses she, her pronouns, but they might not understand why somebody might use they, them pronouns or something else like z-zer pronouns. So can you share a little bit of why somebody, might choose pronouns other than just he, him, or she, her, or those kind of binary pronouns that we have, or why somebody might use they, them pronouns and she, her pronouns, or...
Okay. Yeah, and that's a good question to it, and it can be very difficult to understand that. I use she, her pronouns. I can't speak for somebody that uses they, them pronouns or ze. It can be very difficult. I'm going to give you all a tip. Seriously, everybody can walk away with this tip. Engage that person. Very much like I said right now, you can engage and listen to understand that individual instead of listening to respond or listening with I don't understand you, what are you doing? And I'm already going into it not really wanting to understand. If somebody shares with you, I don't feel fully male, female. Some of us are more than willing to engage with you and tell you about ourselves. That builds that connection with people. Sometimes when people do say, hey, you know what, Olivia, I know you before you transitioned and you became Olivia. I knew you when you used he, him pronouns. And it's been very difficult for me because I had a lot of experiences with that man or that person. And the more we start talking, the more I share, this person has always been inside me and this is who I really am. You start finding that link that you actually did know Olivia all along. You actually did know Janice. And when you really engage to ask, why do you use she, they pronouns or they, them pronouns, you're actually making room to learn a little bit more. A huge thing as well is, again, like my background being in psychology, we do fear the unknown. And do you all remember when we were kids? Maybe I'm the only one in here, I don't know. But I remember I was scared of the dark. And my mom would have to come in and turn the lights on and be like, see, there's nothing here. It's very similar to this. Sometimes when we hear somebody using pronouns that are they, them, for example, or she, they, it can be scary because we're like, is this something new, something outside of everything that I know? Is this going to overtake who I am? And no, it's not going to overtake who you are. The reason we do have the gender norms is because that is where the majority of people tend to fall. What I invite everybody to do is say, yeah, I fall under the gender norms in society, but it's okay if there's something else outside of those gender norms. And that is how you can start paving that way towards understanding that explanation that will come from a person that does use they, them pronouns or she, say pronouns. Go ahead.
So I would also add that on some level, like, it is always vital to listen to understand. But at the same time, you don't need to fully understand something to respect somebody's own sense of themselves. To be honest, I do not understand why anybody would want to be a man. Like, I never have, even before I transitioned. But yet, like, I know that there are cis guys who feel comfortable in that position, and there are trans guys who feel like they are more comfortable or would be more comfortable in that position. And while I can't sort of on a deep emotional level understand what that feels like, understand what it feels like to want to be a guy, I can still say I see I trust you to know yourself better than I know you. And like, to some extent, yes, I can try listening and I can try and sort of get my head around on an intellectual level, but maybe you'll never deeply understand. Maybe you won't ever understand why somebody wants to use its pronouns. There are a couple folks out there who I know who do that. But at the same time, it's like, if that makes that person feel more truly themselves, why not do that, right? Why not respect a part of what that person feels they are? The other thing that I would sort of add, and I don't, this particular nuance is a little tricky to navigate, but it can sometimes be frustrating as a trans person to be sort of always asked to educate. Oh, I want to understand why you use those pronouns. Well, I'm literally just trying to get lunch. Man, this is a Wendy's.
Is it similar to how people have said being Jewish in Utah means that you are the spokesperson for Judaism?
Exactly.
To all your coworkers.
Right, and like, sometimes I love to educate people on Judaism, but sometimes I just want to get lunch or just want to enjoy my book on my plane, as it were. You know, and if somebody is like asking all of these questions about Judaism, it's like, I appreciate your curiosity, but at the same time, like, if I have to go through this conversation 10 times every day, it can be exhausting. So I wonder how you navigate, because you're ultimately like more of a public communicator than I am. Do you ever find yourself having to navigate that frustration of like people, maybe they do want to listen to understand, but you are not in a space where you feel comfortable or able to do that in that particular moment?
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for your input. And can y'all hear me now? Okay. And it can be exhausting, but every single time that how can I start this? Y'all have seen the news lately, right? We've all seen, we're kind of divided at the moment. There's a lot of stuff that divides us. And if I have the opportunity to speak with somebody who doesn't know anything about who and what I am more than willing to do it, just because I know there's going to be more transgender people after I'm long gone. And if I can leave behind a better world, I think that always motivates me, at least. And no, I'm not running for office, not by saying that, okay? But I do promise you, that is, at least personally, that's how I choose to see that. If I can talk to somebody who perhaps truly has never met a trans person or had the chance to ask a question, I just want to be willing to say, you know what, if this is your first encounter, I want it to be a positive encounter. And I want you to walk away feeling like, you know what, everything that I knew about trans people was wrong. And now I know a little bit better.
you.
So I don't know, that's how I do it.
So I see we got some questions. We're going to hold our questions to the end. I promise I'll give people time. I just want to make sure that we give time to all of our panelists. So, but I know there's going to be a lot of discussion afterwards. So our next panelist here.
Can we go to Terry first?
Terry first? We can go Terry first. That is fine. So we will go to Terry Kogan, who is a member of our congregation here. And Terry Kogan is professor of law emeritus at the University of Utah, S.J. Quinney College of Law, where he taught for over 35 years. His areas of expertise include civil procedure, contracts, intellectual property, trusts, estates, art law, legal philosophy, and sexuality and the law. He has spent the past 2 decades considering and writing about the rights of transgender people. In particular, he has explored issues surrounding the legal and cultural norms that mandate the separation of public restrooms by sex. In addition, his scholarship has focused on photography and also copyright law. And so, Terry, if you could talk to us, we've had seen throughout the country hundreds and hundreds of anti-trans laws being proposed and sadly being passed, including here in Utah. And I know that there are a couple of presidential candidates right now who've made this one of their primary focuses of their campaign, it seems. And so this could be a very hot-button issue for the next presidential election. I think it already is. And so, Terry, if you could educate us in particular about some of the laws passed here in Utah and how that's affecting the transgender community, in particular transgender youth, and also what we're seeing around the country.
Great.
And you might want to bring that a little closer to you so we can hear you.
So I want to thank Matt and Kolami for inviting me to address some of these issues. Before directly addressing the Utah legislature's recent passage of a law that bans prescribing puberty blockers to trans youth, I want to offer some background. It's known that young people whose gender identity doesn't match their birth-assigned sex are at an increased risk of distress, depression, anxiety, and suicidality. Moreover, these symptoms may increase at the onset of puberty, and that's where puberty blockers come in. Puberty blockers are medications that help put puberty on hold. The effects are not permanent. When usage is stopped, a young person's body will restart the changes that occur at puberty. Reports make clear that puberty blockers have a positive psychosocial effect on transgender youth. They give a family the time to explore gender-related goals and treatment options while decreasing the stress that a trans youth may experience from the permanent changes caused by puberty. These drugs were used for many years by pediatric endocrinologists, especially for a condition known as precocious puberty. They are not approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, for trans youth, but they are supported by the Endocrine Society, which is the world's largest scientific and professional organization of hormone specialists. A number of concerns have been raised over puberty blockers. Though they have been administered to patients for many years, the risks of these drugs are not completely understood. The potential risks include decreased bone density while a youth is taking puberty blockers, which may not improve once they stop taking the drug. Hot flashes may occur in individuals who are assigned female at birth. Genital size may be permanently decreased in people assigned male at birth. There may be a possible effect on the final height of the youth, which tends to slow while taking these drugs. There are unknown effects on cognitive or brain development, and there is some evidence that these drugs may have a long-term impact on fertility. Before focusing in on Utah, I want to make clear that these concerns have been raised around the world, even by those countries which are strongly known, associated with being very LGBTQ positive. So recently, in the United Kingdom, England's National Health Service decided that it will not routinely offer puberty-blocking drugs to children at identity clinics, saying more evidence is needed about the possible benefits and harms. People under 18 in Britain can still be given puberty blockers, but only if they're in an approved clinical study. Also, the National Health Service is closing the Tavistock Clinic, which is the UK's only dedicated gender identity clinic for children and young people. An independent study, an independent review of that clinic concluded that the clinic's current model of care was leaving young people at considerable risk of poor mental health and distress. And the author, Hannah Barnes, published a very well-received book earlier this year related to the Tavistock Clinic, that the damage done by the clinic's indiscriminate prescribing of puberty blockers to adolescents has caused serious damage. Sweden, again, the first country in the world to introduce and support gender reassignment surgery, gender-affirming surgery, has begun restricting reassignment hormone treatments for minors. In February of last year, Sweden decided to halt hormone therapy for minors except in rare cases. And in December of last year, the National Board of Health and Welfare in Sweden said that mastectomies for young teenage girls wanting to transition should be limited to a research setting. The Netherlands, again a very pro-LGBT country, created something called the Dutch Protocol 25 years ago. And that became the international standard for treating gender dysphoria in transgender youth. And among other things, it claimed that puberty blockers and the effects of those drugs are completely reversible. Since then, this standard of care has been severely criticized in a number of studies.
Do you mind if I
Of course.
jump in briefly? So, this is interesting because I have also been following these international issues. I think that Sweden is a little more complicated. It's actually quite difficult to find details that are not translated by right-wing organizations in the United States. But in general, the sense is that Sweden has a very dispersed and federated healthcare system, and that that system actually, there are some clinics, some regions that have started to restrict gender care. Other regions have, sort of continued it. Likewise, the UK, trans folks have called that Turf Island for a reason. There has been a dramatic backlash to both trans youth and trans adults in the UK. So it's been, I guess, frustrating because these are the sort of the case studies of these three countries, plus occasionally Finland, which has never actually had care for trans minors, have been used by people to pass this, to advocate for this legislation removing trans children from gender affirming care. But the situation is actually a lot more complicated than sort of the standard narrative that has been promulgated in the United States has shown.
Thank you. So,
Yep.
we move to Utah. So there actually is, I'll start with the positive. There is good news for trans people in our state. Utah is the only red state that has non-discrimination protection for trans people. Trans people are included in Utah's hate crime laws. Trans people are included in the 2020 law that bans conversion therapy across the board in Utah. And finally, Utah is the first state to create an eligibility commission that considers on a case-by-case basis whether trans students should be able to participate in athletics in accord with their gender identity. So this is really quite an accomplishment for what is generally considered a very red state. Having said that, let's turn to the legislation that I'm talking about. Senate Bill 16, known as the Transgender Medical Treatments and Procedures Amendments, passed in February of this year. Here is what that law does, and I'll quote from the law. It prohibits a healthcare provider from providing a hormonal transgender treatment to new patients who were not diagnosed with gender dysphoria before July 1st of this year. In effect, the law grandfathers in trans youth who are being currently prescribed puberty blockers. Secondly, again, to quote the law, it prohibits performing sex characteristic surgical procedures on a minor for the purpose of effectuating a sex change. And finally, and again, I'm taking a long law and squeezing it into 3 quotes. It requires the Department of Health and Human Services to conduct a systematic review of the medical evidence regarding hormonal transgender treatments and provide recommendations to the legislature. Utah was, in fact, the first state in our country to place a moratorium on doctors prescribing puberty blockers to trans youth, and since its passage, 18 other states have passed similar laws. I am fundamentally opposed to a moratorium on puberty blockers, and I believe that the decision should be one between the family of a transgender youth and their doctor. Nonetheless, I do not believe that we can simply sweep potential negative effects under the rug, and therefore I applaud the legislature's commitment to conducting long-term studies of the benefits and possible negative effects of puberty blockers. It seems to me that the fundamental issue here is, on the one hand, the known positive social, psychological effects that puberty blockers have on trans youth who are going through puberty versus a fairly wide range of medical uncertainties as to what the effect of taking these drugs will be on the child's future. Thank you.
Barry. And Our final speaker is Lila Rosenfield. In case you've not already noticed, Lila's a very thoughtful and intelligent person who I enjoy very much, and I'm thrilled that she's here. And her parents, who I see here tonight as well, are very proud parents, are members of our congregation. I give a shout out to your dad for 1 second, Micah Rosenfield. He's well known as our community Moyle, and with that,
Don't worry, we'll talk about it.
oh, we'll talk about that. There you go. That feels almost like a sitcom, becoming a transgender woman with a Moyle father.
I have.
But anyways, but one of the things I'd like to share is that in our conversion to Judaism programs that we do here, we do work with many transgender men who, in part of the process for a man becoming Jewish is to go through circumcision, or if he's already been circumcised, hatafat dam brit, where we take a drop of blood. And Mike is one of many Moalim out there who are progressive and have found a way to be able to fulfill that mitzvah for transgender men, and so that we can, when somebody converts to Judaism, affirm their gender as well in that. So grateful you, Micah, but I'll speak to your child here. Lila is, like I said, a very thoughtful and bright person who is a graduate of Cornell University and is an analyst, a writer, and a planner. And Lila is going to talk to us about how she transitioned in 2017, I believe it was, and in doing so, created a transition ceremony and made a Jewish ritual out of this. And we see throughout the Torah that there are a number of individuals in the Torah who take on new names: Sarah, Abraham, Joshua. And so we see that this is a Jewish thing to do, that when somebody enters a new journey in life, taking on a new name and celebrating that transition. And so, Lila, if you could tell us a bit about your story and the transition ceremony and gender affirmation ceremony you created in a Jewish context.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, thank you, Rabbi. Good evening. Thank you to my fellow panelists for engaging in this vital conversation, to Congregation Kolami for hosting us, and to the Jewish Federation for co-sponsoring this event. On a sunny morning in August of 2018, on the shores of Lake Sunapee in New Hampshire, in front of many loved ones, I consecrated my gender in the eyes of God and the people of Israel. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I am here, ostensibly, to talk about the ceremony that I used that day, a ceremony I designed with the support of Cantor, now Rabbi Cantor, Elizabeth Batsara, a ceremony written over the summer of 2018 and later made public on the Open Siddur project. If you want to find it, I can show you after the panel. I don't know how to talk about it. How do I talk about one of the most joyous moments of my life, a moment where I stood in front of my family and my God and was seen and accepted and embraced for all that I am? How do I talk about all of that in the face of what I am increasingly feeling is a move towards transgenocide? I suppose I'll start at the beginning, and we'll see where we end up. The ritual started weeks before the day of the ceremony in this very building. I asked a Beit Din, a Jewish ritual court, to be convened to certify my intention and the ceremony itself. At the table were Stephen Parker, Meira Schreiber, and Cantor Batsara. I intentionally modeled parts of this ceremony on the Jewish conversion process. You may know a Beit Din as a thing that Jews by choice go to in order to complete their conversion process, although it is used for many other things as well. In this context, the members of the Beit Din will ask difficult, in the context of conversion, members of the Beit Din will ask difficult and probing questions to ensure that a convert has the necessary Jewish education and understands what they are getting themselves into. In this sense, it seems that conversion is a bit of a poor model for gender transition. Two seemingly basic organizing principles of trans politics are: one, that we are born this way, that choice, has nothing to do with the genders we find ourselves to be, and 2, that it is rude, bordering on hateful, to try to challenge a trans person's stated identity. So why conversion? Why a Beit Din? I think there is a resonance between the Jewishness of Jews by choice and the gender of trans people. Many, though not all converts I know, report a feeling of having always been Jewish and just needing to figure it out. Our tradition makes this concept explicit. Converts were at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah along with the rest of us. We'll get back to that idea in a minute. Nevertheless, in our temporal material reality, converts in some sense choose to take the steps required to convert. And those choices come with consequences, risks, and responsibilities. Likewise, with my gender, I feel like I have always been called to womanhood, but that calling says nothing about how I live in the world. Being a woman, especially being a Jewish woman, comes with certain consequences, risks, and responsibilities. In the language of seminal queer theorist Judith Butler, who is Jewish, I had to learn how to do womanhood. This was what the Beit Din was for. In addition to certifying the ceremony itself was appropriate within the living Jewish tradition, the thing that the Dayanim were there to confirm was that I understood the consequences, the risks, the responsibilities that came with taking on Jewish womanhood in the eyes of God and the people of Israel. Importantly, they did not try to pry into my heart of hearts. It was not their responsibility, just like it is not the responsibility of Michael Kennedy or Ron DeSantis. It is not even the job of my doctor to ask, do you really at the core of your being feel like a woman? Rather, it was their job to understand that by choosing to shift my social role, I would feel the weight of a different set of expectations and a different set of consequences. My conversation with the Beit Din was deeply personal, deeply difficult at times, but at no point did they challenge who I knew myself to be. The same cannot be said of the likes of Matt Walsh, the self-described theocratic fascist who scammed several trans people into appearing in his fake documentary, What is a Woman? The first step on the day of my ceremony was a mikveh, a Jewish ritual bath. I stripped and dipped myself 3 times in the water of Lake Sunapee. As you may know, mikveh rituals require an observer to ensure that all parts of the body have been completely immersed. My father was my observer. Given that he had learned to be a moil in order to mark my entry into the covenant as a boy, it seemed only fitting that he be the one to shepherd my rededication to the covenant as a girl. Thinking back, though, I cannot help but think about what it means to bathe as a trans person. I was naked, technically in public. The mikveh was a celebration of my body, of who I was becoming, but today fear of trans bodies is so rampant that in Florida, if I fail to leave the bathroom at the request of a cis person, I can be imprisoned for up to a year. And unlike with a mikveh, I have no intention of going naked to a bathroom in Florida. I'm terrified that next year Utah will pass similar legislation. They will pass laws that make it difficult or impossible for me and my trans siblings to exist in public as most cis people do. The term sometimes used is urinary leash. These laws create virtual walls, preventing us from traveling a certain distance beyond our home. The ceremony itself begins with the lighting of a Havdalah candle. In Judaism, we use this ritual candle to mark moments of transition, endings and new beginnings. The candle will remain lit for the entirety of the ceremony, marking this as a liminal moment, an in-between time. The twisted braids of the candle represent perhaps the way that time twists onto itself, the ways the past, present, and future are fundamentally linked. And then I bless the candle with the following prayer. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, ha'ma'avir le'ovrim. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, helper to those who transform. This blessing may sound familiar to you. I spoke it before the Utah House Health and Human Services Committee. I told them that God lifts up those who transform, that transforming oneself is a sacred act. I begged them not to be a pharaoh to trans children, but of course they did not listen. We know that Pharaoh did not stop with his attempt to eliminate the Hebrew children. A heart hardened is not so easily softened again. And I fear that, like Florida, which has effectively banned transition-related health care for adults, our legislature will likewise attempt to control my body. The core of the ceremony begins with a declaration before God, an invocation of the covenant, and then a blessing by the parents or a mentor figure based upon the blessing used in a naming ceremony. I cannot describe what it meant for my parents to stand in front of me and ask God that I be a blessing on my family for many years to come. Parents, if your child comes out to you as trans, this is the difference. Even if it's hard at first, even if you don't fully get it, this is the moment your kid needs you the most. And if you can be there for them, if you can see them as they are, you will reforge that bond stronger than it's ever been. The gender change part of the ceremony ends with the recitation of a blessing from the morning liturgy. Blessed are you, source of being, Spirit of the world, who has made me according to your will. I would love to give an hour-long spiel about my more esoteric thoughts on my gender, but in the interest of time, I will simply say this. Because of this ceremony, in a metaphysical sense, I have always been a woman. God is not bound by time. I received the covenant at Mount Sinai as a woman, and in the book of all names, my chosen name, the name that my parents would have given me had I been assigned female at birth, is and was the one written. Speaking of names, the second part of the ceremony is the name change ceremony. This part, like all parts before it, does not happen alone. I did not confer the name upon myself. I called my parents to confer it upon me. Again, re-emphasizing the social nature of transition. Notably, at this point, I'd already legally changed my English name, changed my name on all my documents, but it felt important to change my Hebrew name as well. My Hebrew name, after all, marks me. It marks my faith and my ethnicity when I choose to share it. Not having the choice of when to share such information, though, as Jews know, can be dangerous. Did you know that Tennessee and Montana has made it impossible this year for trans people to change their gender marker on their ID? That means that if you're presenting as your lived gender and someone looks at your ID, they'll know you're trans. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, tried to get the Texas DMV to send him a list of all the people who have changed their gender marker on their driver's license. Is the picture starting to come together? The ceremony concludes when the transitioner extinguishes the Havdalah candle, after which everyone recites the Shechechianu. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this joyous time. This doesn't feel like a particularly joyous time to be trans. I know this song and dance. The first major book burning of the show was the Library of Magnus Hirschfeld, a doctor who Hitler called the most dangerous Jew in Germany for providing care and compassion to his transgender patient. The head of the American Principles Project, a major super PAC, just tweeted out that trans people control the media. What the heck am I doing talking about the Shechechianu when they're trying to eradicate us? Oh, I'm sorry, trying to eradicate our ideology from public life. But that's the thing, isn't it? That's what we're fighting for. You can find photos of people celebrating a Passover Seder mere hours before the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. There were 42 weddings performed on Lag BaOmer in 1942 in the Lodz Ghetto. There are records of Jewish partisans celebrating weddings between picking off SS officers. Our joy, it is a threat. The fact that I celebrated my womanhood in front of God and my people, that is something that is terrifying to those who want to see me gone. Through wonder and wisdom, transformation and song, God sustains us. And we take that sustenance and we fight. We celebrate and we fight back equally loud, and both serve as a reminder that we will not go quiet. Emma Goldman, the great turn-of-the-century Jewish anarcho-feminist, said in her autobiography that a cause which stands for a beautiful ideal should not demand the denial of life and joy. Judaism reminds us that in the face of persecution and oppression, our joy, our celebrations, our rituals are the visions of the world to come that sustain us, that give us life, and that bring us into a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you, for beautiful, thoughtful, empowering teachings. That I know there's probably many questions out here, so I wanted to see if anybody has any questions to our panelists and everyone as a whole. Rusty. And I'll repeat the questions just so people on our live stream and in the audience can hear. But go ahead. So what Rusty, the question was what Rusty shared is that he is taking a medication that has some fairly dangerous side effects that could lead to heart issues, death, etc. And yet it seems like that the Utah legislature is cherry-picking this one, the medication and stuff for hormone blockers, puberty blockers, because of the dangerous side effects of them, while not putting a stop to other medications that have potentially dangerous side effects that don't have to do with transgender issues. Terry, would you like to speak on that?
So implied in your question is the obvious conclusion that the Utah legislature is targeting trans people, right? I mean, there's no question about that there are many types of legislation related to drugs that might increase the health of the population taking that drug, but this legislature has focused on a particular population, and I deeply condemn that. Having said it, I am glad when studies are done as to the potential harm of people taking drugs. It's unfortunate that they are targeting trans youth for the wrong reasons. Not all of them, but many of them. But it is good that studies are mandated as to what are the actual effects. So I agree with the spirit of your question, but I think that part of the legislation mandating future studies is a good thing.
Thank you. Rachel.
Sure. So just to repeat what Rachel said, you all are awesome, and thank you. But also Rachel's kind of reaffirming, I think the question that many people have, which is, by the way, you might know about me, I know and am friends with many legislators, including some who unfortunately voted in favor of these things. And what I can say about something I'll say, I could speak to many of their great qualities. They are not doctors, they're not medical professionals, and that's something I think in many different areas within American law right now that we're seeing is people who have as much medical expertise as I do, which is maybe we should put them on the Misha Bayrock list, are determining what medical decisions. And so, Lila, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I think that there's a sort of a couple different related tacks. Because, like, yes, obviously, the state legislature is targeting this particular treatment, whether or not they are doctors, that, you know, is like, why the heck does every single politician in America need to have a detailed opinion on this particular sort of medication regimen that is used by maybe 1% of the population? And I guess, right, like, as was perhaps clear from my introduction, you know, I think about these issues on a social level a great deal. And in some ways, right, a sort of the most generous reading that perhaps I could give is that transition care is unique among many forms of medical care, and that it does entail some form of choice, of social transformation. And I mean, I'm sure you could point to other medication regimens that do have parts of that, but you know, transition-related health care is deeply tied with the social aspects of transition, not for everybody, but for some people. And it's, you know, like, there is an evidence base for it, but there's also a part of it which is, like, it is about the choice for trans people to take control of our bodies, to have our bodies do what we want them to do. And there is, I think, an implicit threat to that, right? There is a threat, and you know, there's a great deal of discussion about how this fight and the fight to protect reproductive rights are deeply intertwined. Both those on the right and those on the left have sort of identified the links where, you know, I think that there was a politician in Arkansas who said something to the effect of, I view this as an extension of the pro-life fight, because we're not talking about an unborn fetus, but we're talking about the potential to have a child. And, you know, so there is this desire, because, you know, many forms of HRT do have effects on fertility, there is a desire to limit people's ability to choose an approach to their body that maybe does not lead to the maximization of reproductive capacity, as it were. So that's the sort of less generous reading.
Are they mandating things about vasectomies then, and things so there you go. But yeah, Terry, go ahead.
So 2 quick comments, and this in part is an answer to our friend in the back's question about the danger of drugs that he is taking. There is no question that a major cause of the backlash with respect to puberty blockers is that it involves youth. Mm-hmm. It involves underage minors. And that is why the state, in its so-called in loco parentis, as an acting parent of every child in the state, sees a particular need for the legislature to intervene. A second comment that I think is implied by your statement, your comment, Rachel, is, of course, the simple solution, if the legislature were truly concerned about youth taking these drugs and the potential effects, would have been simply to mandate ongoing studies and not to ban doctors from prescribing these drugs, right? If the concern is really learning about possible future harms, a legislature can very properly set up studies and invest public funds in those studies without telling doctors and trans families what they can and cannot do.
Thank you. Let's see, we have some other questions here. I saw Helene in the back. Helene? So just to repeat what... Thank you, Helene. So to repeat what Helene said, our comment was probably a lot of folks in libraries are getting people coming up saying, why is this in the library? Take this out. Go up when you see things affirming people and thank the librarian. Thank you for having this out. And that's a good message. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Okay, so we got two questions here. Maybe the first one, Olivia, you haven't spoken in a while, so we'll go to you first. It was
Well, it's okay. Yeah, sure.
about pronouns and when might a person use these/er pronouns? And
Well, to answer what you said about pronouns is I don't know, and this is what I mean. Everybody can, especially when it comes to the non-binary genderqueer community, they may adopt pronouns they, them for one reason or another. Maybe they feel more male, more female in one way or another. They may feel a very different way, and that is why they adopt she, they. And very much like we adopt she, her pronouns, we can tell you what that is. And that is very much goes back to what I shared earlier about listening to people and really engaging with people to learn something beyond that. And that is what you can do if you hear somebody referring to the pronoun she, they. Like I can tell you, kind of like she, her, per se.
Sie, they, zir is like, it's a set of pronouns.
so like
Yeah.
she, her, hers,
Yeah.
he, him, his.
Yeah.
Sie, yeah.
Yeah.
They're
So a lot of cultures do adopt different pronouns. Like there's Native American tribes that have adopted like this concept of a third gender almost, that they see themselves outside of what we know as gender, and they may adopt pronouns that are familiar to us. For example, like they, them. Some may even just go by she, her. But it's very much individual to that tribe. Now, when it comes to si, se, sir, I know even in Mexico there is a tribe called Muxas, and they use different pronouns that mean something completely different to them. So I would always just encourage you to engage with that. You had your hand raised. Go ahead.
And what was the second one? Oh, Google. So Rachel said Google is your friend. You can find good stuff on Google and also practice using. I will confess that first time I met somebody using they, them pronouns, I thought it was kind of unusual and I didn't understand it. And it was hard for me to be like, well, she, well, wait, they, and it was hard. And the more, now it's not weird at all for me. It's, yeah. So the more practice you get. Thank you.
In general, what I have found living in the trans community is that they, them is usually the most common gender neutral pronoun. So most people, if, you know, in general, actually, it's a good choice to default, especially if somebody is gender ambiguous, to using they, them pronouns until you can ask. If somebody is using what we call neopronouns, like Zizir, they will tell you, or they like there's not usually an implied expectation that you use them until they tell you, or they tell you, as it were. But yeah, like usually most non-binary folks I know end up using they, them pronouns just because it's sort of the most commonly used gender neutral pronoun, and that is they, them. It's you use it, you conjugate it in the exact same way you would if it's plural. So if that is a
Let's turn Terry. Oh,
Can I add one more
sure.
thing?
Olivia, go ahead.
So I really, I could get into the academia of things, but the thing is, I know people can get confused with that, and it can be a very individual journey, what pronouns mean. And very much like Lila shared, when we say, oh yeah, it's kind of tiring to hear a trans person explain it to you, it is, but at the same time, if you are honestly engaging with me, that you're like, hey, Olivia, I've seen you at congregation, I really connect with you, but would you mind explaining to me a little bit about your journey? I want to understand it. That helps to build that connection for you. So it can be very difficult to understand them, but at the same time, that is part of the journey of you building that allyship perhaps with that person that uses those pronouns. I hope that helps a little.
Somebody once told me that you don't really know a person until you hear their coming out journey, and my friend encouraged me to ask. I never did because I always thought it was too personal, but said to me, Sam, it's helpful to ask people once they become your friend and stuff. Can you tell me your coming out journey? And that way you can get to know them better and who they are. Terry, to the second question, and then we'll take a few more. Don't worry, I see you, Vivian, in the back, and we'll get a few more questions.
With
go ahead.
respect to the question concerning when one prescribes puberty blockers and how old, it's so clear that Micah is in so much a better position than I am to answer this, right?
Take on you, Micah. Oh, shoot.
I guess I'm looking to you as a pediatrician.
All right. So, we don't know off the top of our heads.
Well, I mean, I think the literature suggests that, right, so the goal of puberty blockers is to block major transitions, right? For a trans boy to block the growth of breasts, right? And obviously, the later you start treatment, the more a permanent change that puberty brings on will already have happened. And to the best of my knowledge, that's not reversible. That is, your body goes along what it is doing, and when you take the puberty blocker, it stops the androgens and estrogens from further acting on the development of the body. Is that fair?
That's a roughly yes. The basic reality of transition is that basically all human bodies have all of the genetic material necessary to go through the full development process for both what we would call biological males and biological females. There is not really that much of a distinction. If you look at what's on the Y chromosome, there's very, very little, and obviously everybody has an X chromosome. So really much of the changes that we associate with maleness and femaleness in terms of biological categories are primarily mediated by hormones. And many of those changes first start to occur at the onset of puberty. What puberty blockers do is they block that process. They block hormones. They block the entire cascade for both male and female hormones. And so the ideal is that you start them relatively close to the onset of puberty to stop any changes. Because while some changes are temporary or reversible, right? So like a lot of hormonal changes that occurred in my body as a result of testosterone no longer are present in my body. Just because I no longer have that much testosterone in my body, I have estrogen in my body. But some changes in bone structure, to some extent, not to do too much phrenology, changes in my voice, deepening of my vocal folds, those changes are not reversible. Breast growth in folks who have an E-dominant puberty. But at the same time, when you put somebody who's assigned male at birth, who went through testosterone-dominant puberty on estrogen, they will grow breasts, right? So we, in the trans community, we sometimes call our transitions a second puberty. I will note that ultimately puberty blockers are a sort of compromise. They're a concession to the idea that these are kids who don't necessarily know or who it is argued do not know everything, I guess. Ultimately, if somebody is insistently saying, I'm a girl from age 4, and suddenly they start, male puberty, there's no, right, like if you were to start them on estrogen at the beginning of puberty, a puberty blocker or a testosterone blocker, not even much, you wouldn't have to go with much because there's a feedback loop. They would basically go through puberty like any cis girl, almost exactly the same. And puberty blockers just basically say, okay, we're going to delay that decision. We're gonna freeze your body in time at age 12 until you're 14 or 15 or 16, whatever age the doctor and the family feels comfortable saying, okay, now we think that your gender has been around for long enough that we're willing to start cross-sex hormones.
Thank you. Let's see. Vivian, how's your day going, by the way, Vivian? I don't know. Just saying, how's your day going?
Mazel tov!
All right, Grandma. What, you've been having a burning question back there.
So they are directing the Utah Department of Health to undertake this study and then to report back to the legislature. So one could argue that if legislators who voted for this were acting in good faith, that if in fact the study came back that said all in all puberty blockers are more beneficial, or the benefit greatly outweighs the potential harm, in good faith they would repeal the law. I just don't have that much faith in the good faith of our legislature. Who are conducting it?
The people who's conducting it? Who are the people conducting it?
So it's let me just look at, I have I think it's the Department of Health.
Tracy, do you know?
I think in coordination with the University of Utah, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I think that's right. So they're
Department of Health
they're
and Human
respectful
Services.
medical bodies.
Yeah.
They are all in all non-political bodies who are committed to medical research. I think that's fair.
Is that fair? Yeah.
Yeah,
Is this going to be a biased study, is I think your question.
what?
A biased study. Is this a kangaroo court study? Or is this going to be a legitimate study?
Well, to the extent that the University of Utah is involved, trust me, it's unbiased, right? As someone who paid my salary for 35 plus years. No, I mean, the University of Utah medical school is filled with doctors who are committed to the welfare of patients in general and to LGBT youth, adults and youth in particular. I mean, I've worked on a lot of these issues with a number of doctors, and I have never had reason to believe that they are biased against LGBTQ people.
Okay. Thank you. Before we take our final two questions, I know that Olivia has to run. That's my fault. I told Olivia, don't worry, we will be out of here by 8:30 tops. Then I'm excited to see how many questions and excitement and enthusiasm you all have. So I do want to thank Olivia, but I know she has another commitment she has to run to.
So I will leave it with this. Thank you so much to you two for sharing your expertise. Thank you for your invite. I'm going to leave you with the last note. Love your neighbor, love each other, and that includes these legislators. If we humanize them, do you think that may be a better way? Yeah,
like that.
thank you all.
Great message. Thank you.
so much. Thank you so much. Let's take another.
And I know on your way out we've got something for you. So Debbie, thank you, Olivia. We'll take one or two more questions, and then I also have to go relieve my babysitter. Or else she's just going to leave my kids. Debbie. So the question is, what's the timetable for that study?
This is a long piece of legislation.
And the report back and everything.
I do not think there is a time set for getting back to the legislature. Though I do think that the Department of Health and the university will in fact undertake the study of this expeditiously. There's no reason not to. But there's no timetable.
We do have Tracy Gruber here. Tracy, what is your title?
oh, well, you might be a good resource. So, Tracy, do you want to answer any of these questions? I could see Tracy just being like, oh my gosh. No, go ahead, Tracy. No, thank you. I was tempted to call on you a while ago, but I enjoyed watching Terry sweat a little bit. So, that was entertaining.
And that's my rabbi.
Yeah, right?
Of note, I believe that the Louisiana legislature also commissioned a study, and that one was completed last year. And if you're curious about that, the particulars of that, I would be happy to discuss afterwards.
Thank you. So if you are interested, I, I have to be careful how I phrase things because I am not allowed to endorse any party or anything, but I did say I was going to repeat things that people said so everyone could hear. If you are interested in affiliating, switching your party affiliation, and so that you can also have some influence on the ballot of who gets nominated through primaries for the general election, maybe go talk to my friend Debbie over there. All right. I think we have time for like one last question. I see Micah back here. Micah, you get the last one.
Right. So I don't know what the ACLU is doing in Utah. I just don't know. I know that cases have been brought in other states and courts have issued injunctions against the implementation of the law until the challenge goes through the courts. In terms of sort of basic rights to choose, whatever, it's like the Dobbs case really put a wrench in those works, right? The abortion case. So it's hard to say what kind of basic rights exist to control over your body, whatever, after the current Supreme Court's recent Dobbs and perhaps other decisions. But having said that, I think there are still important, colorable arguments about decisions of families with respect to youth, children, that seem to be swaying some courts. I do not know what the ACLU is doing in Utah.
Thank you. So with that, unfortunately, I think we could go for a lot more time, but unfortunately my kid's nanny won't. So we're going to have to, maybe you can come up and ask more questions afterwards if you have more, but I can tell, it's not common that we have a bunch of people come out for a couple hours and still the whole time, even at 9 o'clock at night, are like engaged and asking questions, and this has been wonderful. I do want to thank a few people who made this possible. I see from our staff here, Danny Berman, our executive director, and Galit Livnay, our program coordinator, and Faye Lincoln was here. She's on our board and our adult ed chair. I want to give a big thank you to a couple other folks. Matthew Weinstein, who's our social action committee chair, who's set this up and really worked hard on this. Thank you, Matthew. And Federation, I see some folks from Federation here for co-sponsoring this evening. And a big thank you to Shelley Schwartz also for all of her help in putting this together and bringing people out, and all of her amazing advocacy work. And a big thanks as well to the Salt Lake City Police Department. And I really want to thank our incredible panelists this evening. Lila, I loved hearing about your transition ceremony. So if I can just do a shameless plug and say, if that's something that any of you would like to do, that would be meaningful. I would love to be a rabbi that helps facilitate that for you. And Lila, I've seen on your website you have your transition ceremony available there as a resource for other folks. And
Talk to me after
Talk
the
to
ceremony.
Lila.
Like, talk to the rabbi. We can get you hooked up to the
absolutely, we want to affirm that, and gender affirmation ceremony. And so, big thank you to Olivia in absentia, and also to Lila and Terry for sharing your stories, your expertise, and the amazing work you've done and how you've inspired us all this evening. So, Toda Rabah, thank you. And we have, Shelley has got for us, on behalf of our congregation, a couple of things for you. Shelley, if you want to give that to, we already hooked Olivia up on her way out, but thank you very much, Shelley. Thank you to you. And so thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming out, and happy Pride Month, everybody.
Pride.
Thank you. That was great. You're a rock star. Terry, thank you. That was awesome. You're the best. You're the best. Thank you.